"Your son needs to toughen up. It's just a toy," my aunt said after her son destroyed my son's brand new Christmas bike in an hour. When I asked her to replace it, my mom backed her up and told me to stop making a scene. I loaded my car, took my son, and left without a word. Mom called 14 times before I picked up and said one sentence. I spent 3 months picking up extra shifts to buy my son his first real bike. My aunt's kid spent 1 hour turning it into garage scrap. And when I asked for it to be replaced, somehow I was the one ruining Christmas. I need to back up a little, because none of this makes sense unless you understand what that bike meant and what it cost me to get it. And I don't mean just the money, though the money was part of it. I mean what it represented, what it was supposed to prove, and who it was supposed to prove it to. My name is Cole. I'm 31 years old. I work as an HVAC technician for a mid-sized company in the suburbs of Charlotte, North Carolina, and I am the full-time single father of a 7-year-old boy named Wesley. Wesley has been mine, fully mine, since the divorce finalized 2 years ago. And I say mine, not because I won some bitter custody war in a courtroom, but because his mother, Noel, decided she didn't want the weight of it anymore. Packed 2 suitcases on a Thursday while Wesley was at school, moved to Raleigh with a man she met on some dating app, and told our son through a FaceTime call that she would see him real soon. Baby, which became every other weekend, which became one Saturday a month, which became a $50 Amazon gift card on his birthday with no return address and no note. I don't talk about Noel much. Not because I'm still angry, though parts of me probably are, but because Wesley hears everything, processes everything, and I refuse to be the parent who uses his kid as a scoreboard. But there's one thing she said that I need to tell you because it's the reason this whole story matters. Noel told Wesley once, during one of those increasingly rare weekend visits, she told him, and I know exactly how she said it, because Wesley repeated it to me later with the exact same inflection she uses when she's trying to sound breezy about something deliberately cruel. She said, "Your dad can't afford nice things, baby, but that's okay. You'll have nice things when you come stay with me." She said this to a 6-year-old boy. A 6-year-old boy who came home that Sunday night and sat on the couch next to me and asked, quietly, almost whispering, "Dad, are we poor?" I told him no. "Buddy, we're not poor. We just spend our money on the stuff that matters." And then I went to the bathroom and closed the door and sat on the edge of the bathtub for 15 minutes with my hands pressed against my face, trying to hold myself together, because my son had just repeated his mother's cruelty like it was a weather report, and I didn't know which part hurt worse, what she said or how calmly he delivered it. So when September rolled around and Wesley started talking about wanting a bike, a real bike, not the little plastic balanced tricycle he'd been riding in circles around the apartment complex parking lot since he was 4, I decided. That was it. That was going to be his Christmas present. Not just any bike. The one he wanted. He'd found it in a sporting goods catalog that came in the mail, the kind of thick, glossy catalog nobody actually orders from anymore, but that somehow still shows up between the electric bill and the pizza coupons. And Wesley had flipped through it the way other kids flip through comic books, slowly, carefully, with his finger tracing the pictures. And he'd found this 20-inch blue and black mountain-style bike with front suspension and a water bottle holder and a silver bell on the right handlebar, and he circled it in red marker, careful not to go outside the lines, and tore the page out and taped it to the refrigerator like it was a contract with the universe. Every morning he'd eat his cereal at the kitchen table, Cheerios with exactly 1 spoonful of sugar because that's the deal we made, and he'd stare at that catalog page on the fridge like it was a countdown clock. He never asked me to buy it, never begged, never whined. He just looked at it every single day with this quiet certainty, like he already knew I'd figure it out, and that faith, that total unearned trust from a 7-year-old who'd already been let down by one parent, that was the thing that made me decide I would work every weekend from September to December if I had to. The bike was $289.99 plus tax, which doesn't sound like a lot until you're a single father paying $1,150 a month in rent for a 2-bedroom apartment that smells like the previous tenant's cigarettes no matter how many times you clean the carpet, plus $680 a month in daycare, plus groceries for a growing kid who eats like he's training for something, plus utilities, car insurance, gas. The minimum payments on the credit card debt Noel left behind like a farewell gift when she decided motherhood was too much friction for her. New lifestyle. I sat down one night after Wesley was asleep and did the math, and the math said there was no room. There was no room in the budget for a $300 bike. Not even close. So I made room. I started picking up every extra job my company offered. Saturday residential installs, Sunday emergency service calls, the ones nobody else wanted because they were in crawl spaces full of spiders or attics that hit 130 degrees in September, or rental properties 2 hours outside the city where the owner wanted the work done before the tenant got home. I said yes to all of it. I came home smelling like insulation and sweat, and sometimes something I couldn't identify, and I showered, and I put Wesley to bed, and I took the cash from the side jobs. Always cash because I needed to see it, feel it, know it was real, and I put it in an envelope in my sock drawer, and I wrote the running total on the outside in pencil, so I could erase and update it every week. Wesley didn't know about the envelope, but he knew about the catalog page. Every morning, Cheerios, 1 spoon of sugar, eyes on the fridge, that quiet faith. By the second week of December, the envelope said $312, and I drove to the sporting goods store on my lunch break with insulation dust still in my hair, and I bought the bike, and the cashier asked if I wanted a gift receipt, and I said no, because nobody was returning this, not ever. And I drove it home and hid it in the back of my closet behind a stack of moving boxes I still hadn't unpacked from the apartment before this one. 2 moves ago, boxes I'd been dragging from place to place like portable evidence of a life that never quite settled. I spent 3 nights assembling that bike after Wesley went to bed. Living room floor, TV on mute, so the wrench sounds and the click of the chain tensioner wouldn't carry down the hallway to his room. I read the instruction manual twice, which is not something I normally do because I fix mechanical systems for a living and my ego usually says I can figure it out. But this was different. This was Wesley's, and every bolt had to be right. I adjusted the seat height 3 times. Tested the brakes until they were perfect, inflated the tires to exactly the PSI printed on the sidewall, lubed the chain, spun the wheels to make sure they were true. And when it was done, I wrapped it in a bedsheet because I didn't own a box big enough, tied a red ribbon around the handlebars, a real satin ribbon I bought at the dollar store because I wanted it to look like something. And I leaned it against the wall next to the little fake Christmas tree we decorated together with ornaments from the Target clearance aisle. Christmas morning. Wesley walked into the living room in his pajamas, the ones with the rockets on them, rubbing his eyes, and he stopped in the doorway. He didn't scream. He didn't jump. He didn't do any of the things kids are supposed to do in Christmas commercials. He just stood there with his mouth slightly open and his arms at his sides, and he stared at the bike like he was looking at something impossible, something that only existed in catalogs and on refrigerator doors, and he turned to me, slowly, and said, "Is that really mine?" And I said, "Yeah, buddy, that's really yours." And he walked over to it so carefully, 1 step at a time, like he was afraid it might flicker and disappear if he moved too fast. And he put both hands on the handlebars and just held on. Didn't try to ride it. Didn't ring the bell. Just held on, like if he gripped tight enough nobody could ever take it from him. That was 7 in the morning. By 8 we were supposed to be at my mother's house for Christmas brunch, same as every year. Denise, my mom, has hosted Christmas brunch for as long as I can remember. The whole extended family shows up. Her sister Patrice's husband, their son Landon who's 13, a handful of cousins, the usual rotation of people who see each other 3 times a year and spend most of that time pretending the other 362 days didn't happen. I loaded the bike into the trunk of my Honda, which required folding down the back seats and angling it diagonally, because Wesley refused to leave it at the apartment. And honestly, I didn't blame him, not even a little, and we drove the 40 minutes to my mother's house in North Charlotte with Wesley turning around in his booster seat every 2 minutes to make sure the front wheel was still visible through the gap in the seat. Now I need to tell you about Landon, because if you don't know the history, what happened next might seem like a random accident, an unlucky moment, a kid being a kid. It wasn't. Landon is 13 years old, and he has never, in his entire life, heard the word no from his mother and had it mean anything. Patrice, my aunt, treats that boy like he is simultaneously the most fragile and the most exceptional child ever produced by the American school system, a misunderstood genius who just needs the world to catch up to his energy, when in reality what he is, and I say this without hatred, but with the clarity of someone who has paid actual money to repair the things he's broken, is a 13-year-old boy who does whatever he wants with other people's belongings and has never once been made to face a consequence for it. Last Thanksgiving, Landon got hold of Wesley's tablet. It was a refurbished Samsung I'd bought for Wesley's 6th birthday, so he could play educational games and watch cartoons on long car rides. And it wasn't fancy, but it worked, and Wesley treated it like it was made of glass. Landon picked it up off the couch, and nobody knows exactly what happened next, but the screen ended up cracked from one corner to the other in a spiderweb pattern that made half the display unreadable. Patrice looked at the tablet, looked at me, tilted her head slightly the way people do when they're about to say something that insults your intelligence, and said, "Oh, kids, right?" And then she went back to her glass of Riesling. Didn't offer to replace it. Didn't offer $1 toward it. Didn't make Landon apologize. I paid $95 out of my own pocket for a screen replacement, and I never said a word about it because my mother gave me that look, the one she's been giving me since I was 12 years old, the one that means don't make this into a thing, Cole. Just absorb it and move on like you always do. So when we arrived at my mother's house on Christmas morning and Wesley wanted to ride his brand new bike in the driveway, I had exactly one rule, and I didn't need to explain it to anyone over the age of 5. Landon does not touch this bike. I didn't announce it to the family because I wasn't looking to start a thing on Christmas, but I crouched down next to Wesley in the driveway and told him quietly, "This is your bike, bud. You don't have to let anyone else ride it if you don't want to. Not even if they ask." And Wesley nodded, quickly, seriously, the way kids nod when they already know the danger you're warning them about. The first hour was fine. Beautiful, actually. Wesley rode up and down the driveway, slow and careful, both hands on the grips, testing the brakes every few feet, grinning so wide I could see every gap where his baby teeth used to be. The adults were inside doing what adults do on Christmas morning at my mother's house, which is drink coffee and eat cinnamon rolls and pick at Denise's famous egg casserole that she makes every year from the same recipe card she's had since 1996, and every year she acts genuinely surprised when someone says it's good. I was helping set the dining room table, folding napkins into triangles the way my mother insists they be folded, when I heard it. Not a crash, not a scream, just this long, grinding, metallic scraping sound, the sound of something being dragged across concrete at speed, a sound that if you've ever worked with your hands you recognize immediately as the sound of something being destroyed. And then silence. And then Wesley. Not screaming. Not wailing. Crying the quiet way. The way kids cry when something bad has actually happened and they don't know what to do about it. And they're not performing for anybody. They're just trying to hold themselves together and failing. I was out the front door in about 3 seconds. The bike was on its side in the middle of the driveway. The front wheel was bent at an angle that wheels are not supposed to bend at, pushed sideways like someone had torqued it against a curb. The chain was hanging off the gears, half ripped, dragging on the ground. The seat was twisted almost backwards, the vinyl cover torn along one side where it had scraped the asphalt. The right handlebar grip was shredded. The bell was gone entirely, snapped off, and I found it later in the gutter about 20 feet away. And Landon, 13-year-old Landon, was standing about 10 feet from the wreckage with his hands in the pockets of his hoodie, looking at the ground the way someone looks at the ground when they know exactly what they did and are already calculating how to make it not their fault. Wesley was sitting on the curb, not next to the bike, a few feet away from it, like he couldn't bear to be close to it anymore. He wasn't touching it. He was just looking at it the way you look at something you love that someone killed right in front of you while you were gone for 2 minutes. By the time I reached him, he wasn't even crying anymore. He'd gone past crying into that still, hollow quiet that is worse than any sound a child can make because it means the hurt has gone somewhere he can't reach it, and neither can you. I found out what happened from my younger cousin Marisol, who is 24 and had been sitting on the porch steps the entire time, drinking coffee and watching the driveway, because that's the kind of person Marisol is, the kind who sees things. She told me that Landon had walked up to Wesley and asked if he could try the bike. Wesley said no. Firmly. Clearly. No. Landon shrugged and walked away. And then Wesley went inside to use the bathroom, and the second that front door closed behind him, Landon grabbed the bike off its kickstand, got on, and pedaled full speed down the driveway. He jumped the curb into the street, tried to do some kind of trick off the neighbor's lawn edge where the grass meets the sidewalk, lost control completely, and dragged the bike sideways across the asphalt for about 15 feet before it finally stopped. Marisol said she could hear the scraping from the porch. She said Landon got up, looked at the bike, looked at the scratches on his own palms, and then just walked away. Walked back inside. Got on his phone. Didn't tell a single person what he'd done. I picked up the bike. I carried it to my car. I put it in the trunk next to the spot where it had ridden in perfectly that morning, and I closed the trunk carefully, the way you close a casket. And then I walked back inside and I found Patrice in the living room, sitting in my mother's armchair with a plate of food balanced on her knee, and I said, calmly, because my son's face was in my head, and I was not going to give anyone in that house the satisfaction of watching me come apart. I said, Patrice, Landon destroyed Wesley's bike. The one I just bought him for Christmas. I need you to replace it. She looked up at me like I'd interrupted her mid-thought about something more important. Did this little half laugh, the kind of laugh that isn't really a laugh, it's a dismissal shaped like a sound. And she said, oh, come on, Cole. Your son needs to toughen up. It's just a toy. Just a toy. 3 months of Saturday crawl spaces and Sunday attic installs. An envelope in a sock drawer. A page ripped from a catalog and circled in red marker by a boy who believed his father would come through because one parent already hadn't. Just a toy. I said, it's not a toy, Patrice. It's a $300 bike. Your son was told not to touch it. He waited until Wesley was inside and took it anyway, and he destroyed it. I need you to replace it. And Patrice set down her plate and looked at me the way she always looks at me, like I am an inconvenience she can't believe still exists, and she said, boys play rough, Cole. That's what happens when kids share. And I said, he didn't share it. He took it. And that's when my mother walked in. Denise had heard everything from the hallway. I'm certain of it because she had that face on, the one I've known since childhood, the tight lips and the slightly raised eyebrows and the brisk, purposeful walk that means she is about to manage a situation, not solve it, not address it, manage it, which in our family has always meant making the loudest person quiet so the surface can go back to being smooth. She put her hand on my arm, not gently but firmly, the way you steer someone, and she walked me into the little hallway between the kitchen and the guest bathroom, and she leaned in close and she whispered, you are embarrassing me in front of my sister. Not, what happened to Wesley's bike. Not, is Wesley okay? Not, let me talk to Patrice. Not, how can we fix this? She said, you are embarrassing me. Her son, asking for accountability. On Christmas, while her grandson sat on a curb outside holding the red satin ribbon that used to be tied around the handlebars because it was the only piece that wasn't broken. I looked at my mother for a long time. I don't know how long exactly, but long enough that she started shifting her weight from one foot to the other, and her arms crossed, and her jaw tightened, and she did that thing she does when she knows she's chosen wrong, but the cost of admitting it feels higher than the cost of staying committed to the mistake. And I realized, standing in that hallway that smelled like coffee and cinnamon and something under it that had been rotting for years, that there was nothing I could say to this woman that she didn't already know and had decided not to care about. Every word I had was one she'd already heard from me in some form across 31 years of being the son who absorbed and moved on, and she had filed every one of those words under Cole being dramatic, and there was no sentence, no argument, no amount of calm, reasonable explanation that was going to open a drawer she'd spent her whole life keeping shut. So I didn't say anything. I walked out of the hallway, through the kitchen, past Patrice who was already back on her phone, past the cousins picking at the remains of the cinnamon rolls, past the egg casserole that nobody was going to compliment this year, and I went outside and found Wesley still sitting on the curb in exactly the same position I'd left him in, like he hadn't moved a single muscle, like he'd been waiting for me to come back and tell him what happened next because he already knew nobody else in that house was going to. I said, hey buddy, we're gonna go. And Wesley looked up at me with those enormous brown eyes that still break my heart every single time because they are his mother's eyes in his father's face, and they carry every question he's ever been afraid to ask. And he said, are we leaving? And I said, yeah, bud, we are. And he stood up and he took my hand, didn't ask why, didn't argue, didn't look back at the house, just put his hand in mine and walked with me to the car and climbed into his booster seat and buckled himself in. 7 years old. And I thought, this should not be a skill he has yet, this quiet acceptance of leaving somewhere he was supposed to be safe. But it is, and that is not his fault. I turned around before I got in the car. My mother was standing in the front doorway. Patrice was behind her, arms crossed. A couple of cousins were visible in the window like an audience that didn't buy tickets. And I said, You just showed my son exactly who matters in this family. And I got in the car and I pulled out of the driveway and I drove. In the rearview mirror, I could see my mother still standing in the doorway, not moving, and Patrice stepping forward and starting to yell something about me being dramatic and ruining Christmas for everyone, which is an astonishing thing to say to the father of the child whose Christmas you just let your kid destroy. But I didn't hear most of it because the windows were up and my son was in the back seat, and I was done listening to that family narrate my feelings back to me incorrectly. Wesley fell asleep about 20 minutes into the drive home. He'd wedged the empty cardboard box the bike came in between his legs in the back seat. The box I'd almost thrown away that morning, but he'd asked to keep, just in case I need it for the next one. Dad. And he was hugging it in his sleep, arms wrapped around it like it was a stuffed animal. And I drove the remaining 20 minutes with the radio off, and the window cracked an inch, and my jaw clenched so tight I could feel it in my temples and behind my eyes. My phone started buzzing about 15 minutes after I left my mother's house. Denise. I let it ring. She called again, and again, and again, 14 times total. I know because I sat in the parking lot of my apartment complex after I carried Wesley inside, and I scrolled through the notifications one by one like I was reading the stages of grief in reverse. The first 5 voicemails were angry. Cole, you are being absolutely ridiculous right now. You need to turn that car around and come back. This is not how we handle things in this family. You are making a mountain out of a molehill, and you know it. The next 5 were bargaining. Honey, listen, just come back, okay? We can sit down, all of us, and talk about this like adults. I'm sure Patrice didn't mean it the way it sounded. She just has a different parenting style. Let's just work through it together. The last 4 were panicked. Cole, please. Please pick up. Your aunt is crying. Everyone is upset. Your cousins are asking what happened. I just need to know you and Wesley are safe. Please call me back. Please. I picked up on the 15th call. It was almost 11 at night. Wesley was in his bed, still in his Christmas rocket pajamas, the bike box on the floor next to him because he'd asked me to leave it there, and I was sitting on the kitchen floor with my back against the cabinets because that's where I'd ended up after I put him down and locked the door, and the adrenaline finally drained out of my body and my legs just quietly stopped cooperating. My mother started talking the second I picked up, that rapid-fire rehearse thing she does when she's had hours to build her version of events, and I cut her off. I said one sentence. You chose your sister's pride over your grandson's Christmas, and I need you to sit with that. And I hung up. She didn't call back that night. She didn't call the next day. I think, for the first time in our entire relationship, my mother encountered a sentence she could not rephrase, could not redirect, could not dilute with context or nuance or the phrase, you know how Patrice is. She just had the truth sitting in her call history like a rock in a shoe she couldn't take off. 3 days after Christmas, Marisol texted me. She didn't ask how I was doing or if I wanted to talk about it, or any of the polite things people say when they're trying to approach a wound sideways. She just sent me 5 screenshots of the family group chat with a message that said, I thought you should see this. The group chat had been going for 2 days. Patrice had written, Cole has always been like this. He blows everything out of proportion. It's exhausting. I honestly don't know how Noel put up with it for as long as she did. And my mother, my own mother, had responded, I'm just so tired of the drama. I don't know why he can't just let things go like a normal person. And then Patrice again. He always does this. And next to that message, in small gray text, it said Denise liked this message. A thumbs up. On a message calling her son exhausting and dramatic. She couldn't type one word in my defense, couldn't manage a well, the bike was new, or even a let's not pile on. But she could tap a thumbs up emoji on her sister's contempt. I sat with those screenshots for a long time that night. And then I did something I hadn't done before, not out of anger, but out of the kind of clarity that comes when you stop defending a position and start examining the evidence. I opened my banking app and scrolled back. 3 years of transactions. Every transfer to my mother's account. Every Venmo. Every, I'll pay you back, that was never mentioned again. The total was $14,000. $14,000 in 3 years. $500 when her furnace broke. $800 for car brakes. $1,200 when she was behind on property taxes. $300 here, $200 there, small enough each time to feel manageable, large enough in total to be a second car payment, or a year of Wesley's daycare, or 31 weeks of Saturday crawl spaces and Sunday attic calls. And then I remembered something that hit different now. Last March, my mother co-signed a car loan for Patrice. $22,000. For her sister who can't make Landon apologize for breaking a tablet. In April, 1 month later, Wesley needed to see an ENT specialist for recurring ear infections that were starting to affect his hearing, and the bill after insurance was $2,800, and I called my mother and asked if she could help. Not pay the whole thing. Just help. Anything. And she said, in that careful, sympathetic voice she uses when she's about to say no, I'm really tight on money right now, honey. I wish I could. She co-signed a $22,000 car loan for Patrice 4 weeks before telling me she couldn't contribute to her grandson's medical bill. I paid that $2,800 over 6 months for $167 a month on top of everything else, and I never brought it up again. Until now. Until I was sitting on my kitchen floor on Christmas night looking at bank statements that told a clearer story than any family group chat ever could. A week after Christmas, Patrice called me. I picked up because I genuinely, naively, stupidly thought she might be calling to do the right thing. She wasn't. She called to inform me that I owed Landon an apology for leaving my mother's house without saying goodbye to him. I want you to read that one more time. The mother of the child who destroyed my son's Christmas present called me, the father of the child whose present was destroyed, to demand that I apologize to her son for leaving. I laughed. I actually laughed. Not a bitter laugh or a performative laugh, but a real, involuntary, surprised laugh. The kind that escapes when your brain hits a wall of absurdity so thick that the only available response is genuine amusement. And then I said, Patrice, your son owes mine a bike and you owe me 3 months of overtime. We can start there. And she said something about me being petty and childish, and I said, Merry late Christmas, Patrice. And I hung up, and I have not spoken to her since, and I don't plan to. My mother made a few more attempts over the next 2 weeks. A text that said, can we please talk about this? A voicemail that started with a sigh and ended with, I just want us all to move past this. Moving past it. That phrase. The family equivalent of asking someone to pretend the knife was never there because somebody pulled it out and wiped the blood off the handle. You can't move past something that hasn't been acknowledged. You can't heal what nobody will name. And she was offering motion without direction, reconciliation without accountability, which isn't reconciliation at all. It's just silence with a smile on it. I didn't respond. Not out of cruelty. Not as punishment. I just had nothing left to say that she hadn't already heard and dismissed across 3 decades of being the son who keeps it together, the son who picks up the phone, the son who sends the money and absorbs the look and moves on like a good boy, like a quiet boy, like a boy who doesn't make scenes. New Year's Day. Wesley woke up early. The way he does when he can feel something is different, some shift in the house's energy that kids pick up before adults do. And he found me in the garage with a box, a new box, bike-shaped, leaning against the workbench next to my tool bag. He looked at it, looked at me, and said, in that careful voice he uses when he's afraid to hope, is that what I think it is? I'd ordered it a week earlier. A better bike this time. Same 20-inch frame, same blue and black color scheme because I wasn't going to change the thing he loved. But this one had disc brakes instead of rim brakes, thicker all-terrain tires, a real kickstand that locked into place, and a bell that played 2 different sounds depending on which way you flicked the lever. $340, which was more than the first one, and I didn't care, because this one was going to be built by both of us and nobody was ever going to touch it. We built it together on the garage floor. I held the frame steady while Wesley handed me bolts from the hardware bag, one at a time, reading the letter codes off each one like he was performing surgery. I tightened the chain while he tested the bell, over and over, alternating between the 2 sounds with scientific dedication. It took about 2 hours. Partly because assembly is slower when your assistant is 7, and partly because we kept stopping to admire it, to spin the wheels, to squeeze the brakes, to ring the bell one more time, just because. By the time we were done, the garage floor was covered in cardboard and bubble wrap, and Wesley's hands were smeared with bike grease, and he looked at me and said, with a quiet certainty that sounded like the closing line of something, "This one's even better, Dad." He rode it in the driveway that afternoon. Back and forth, slow at first, then faster, then standing up on the pedals with this look on his face like he'd discovered flight. He tested the brakes at the end of every pass. He rang the bell every time he passed the mailbox, both sounds alternating. He popped the front wheel up about 2 inches off the ground at one point and screamed, "Dad, did you see that? A wheelie." And it was technically more of a bunny hop, but I wasn't about to correct him because the look on his face when he landed it was worth every extra shift I've ever worked and every phone call I've ever ignored. I sat on the porch steps with a cup of coffee that went cold about 2 hours ago, and I watched him ride and I thought this is what Christmas was supposed to feel like. Not the casserole and the napkin triangles and the hallway whispers and the 14 missed calls stacking up like a guilt scoreboard. A kid on a bike, a dad on a porch, a January afternoon that doesn't owe anybody anything. I haven't spoken to my mother since that 15th phone call. I haven't spoken to Patrice since I wished her a merry late Christmas. Marisol texts me every couple of weeks, sends Wesley memes he doesn't fully understand yet, but giggles at anyway because she wraps each one in about 40 emojis, and she never asks me to forgive anybody or move past anything or be the bigger person. She just asks if Wesley learned any new tricks on the bike, and I send her videos, and she responds with fire emojis and exclamation points, and sometimes a voice note that's just her going, "Why though, that kid is a natural." And Wesley plays those voice notes on repeat. Wesley rides that bike every day the weather allows. He's gotten fast. He takes the corner at the end of the street without braking now. Last week he made it all the way up the big hill behind the apartment complex without stopping, the one he's been trying to conquer since January. And when he got to the top, he raised both fists in the air like he'd won something, and I guess he had. He doesn't ask about his grandmother. He hasn't mentioned that Christmas since the drive home. He doesn't ask why we don't visit. And I know some people would say I should explain it to him, give him some careful, age-appropriate version of what happened and why, and maybe I will someday. But right now he's 7, and he's happy, and he rides his bike every afternoon and rings the bell at the mailbox and comes inside with grass-stained knees and stories about how he almost made it up the hill in 3rd gear, and that is enough. That is more than enough. That is everything. I didn't leave my mother's house on Christmas night because of a bike. I left because of every hallway whisper, every liked message that called me dramatic, every medical bill she couldn't help with 4 weeks after co-signing a $22,000 car loan for the sister whose kid has never been held accountable for a single thing he's broken. The bike was just the last thing, the visible thing, the thing that finally had a shape my son could see, and that made it different because I could take the disrespect for 31 years, but I would not, sit in that house and watch my boy learn that his pain was an inconvenience. And when I picked up that 15th call and told my mother she chose her sister's pride over her grandson's Christmas, I wasn't trying to be cruel. I wasn't performing. I wasn't making a scene. I was just, for the first time in my life, done pretending it didn't hurt. If any of this felt familiar, if you've been the quiet one, the reliable one, the one who sends the money and swallows the look and drives home alone with the broken thing in your trunk and a sleeping kid in the back seat, I just want to say one thing. Walking away isn't dramatic. It isn't petty. It isn't ruining Christmas. It's choosing your kid over a pattern. And if they call you 14 times to tell you you're wrong, you only need one sentence to tell them the truth. If you made it to the end of this, thank you for listening. If you've got a story of your own, I'd love to hear it. Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. And if you haven't already, go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next one. Take care of yourselves out there.